what are we standing up for? The ability, the freedom to do what's right as God defines that right.
God's the ultimate author of liberty.
We don't want government to stand between us and our freedom to do what is right.
Welcome back to the BNS Podcast. I'm Doug Levesque. With me today is Jason Georges from Emmanuel Baptist Church and Tony Nash from AZ Business Solutions. These guys have been cultural influencers in Shiawassee County, Michigan, and across the state of Michigan. And together we're trying to address cultural issues of our day and trying to use the Bible as the main cultural influencer. We're glad to have you. You can check us out on BibleNation.org. There we have a number of articles, books, materials, and of course all of our podcasts. We're glad you're here. You can check us out on Facebook and YouTube and contact us. We'd love to hear what you have to say. Well, we in our last podcast, gentlemen, we talked about leadership, and really we defined it in principle and said that the Bible is the chief instructor of what good leadership is, and so the principles were really there. We applied it, unfortunately, to poor old President Joe Biden, Sleepy Joe, and that that really it's not good leadership. It's bad leadership. So I want to kind of direct the conversation this time with leadership, reiterate a few things, but then have us kind of lean towards the practical aspects of leadership and how that can help a father, a business owner, a pastor, a politician, and really then end up with good leadership. So we're ending up in something positive because we want good leadership. If a leader
need good leadership.
If a leadership's 80%, if a leader's 80%, he's got 80% good marks. I mean, honestly, I think that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Because people are free agents, and in America, nobody's 80%. Every president has, 40% favorable ratings. No one ever gets to 50% hardly.
Right.
And you have to go back to Reagan to find someone that won 80%, unprecedented in the vote and then had high, rankings after getting back the hostages from Iran and kind of then defeating, Russia, outspending them and kind of breaking the Cold War, ending the Cold War, stuff like that.
Which is a mark of great leadership, of getting people to leave their tribes.
Yeah.
To say, no, this is right. And then to be able to bust through those bubbles.
And Reagan probably is the last example we have, as far as a president's concerned, of really good leadership.
And he was a good example of that, even from previous administrations, too. My family were all lifelong Democrats, social Democrats and union Democrats. And I guess they kind of liked Kennedy, but they criticized Eisenhower on things. But they all ended up voting for Reagan. So I'm voting for Reagan, that guy. And maybe it was because he was older. He was a throwback from, World War II, post-World War II. And, he really had a firm stance definitively in his mind against communism. I mean, that was defining to him. And that appealed to a lot of Democrats as well, because they really didn't want to be seen as, socialist or Democrat in those type of things. Well, last time we started off and we really talked about the definition of leadership. Leadership is different than authority, and if autocratic authority thinks it's a leader, it's wrong. If you have nobody following you, you just have them in chains. They're just taking a walk. That's not leadership, right? We said that leadership and position and power and authority really are two different things. Now, we want it to go together. We want good people to get there and good leadership to be in power, really. But we said that leadership equals influence. That's what it is. You can have good leaders, bad leaders, good influence, bad influence. Influence is gained by giving people a sense of help. You're helping people. You're serving people. Sometimes it could be self-interested. You're giving people what they think they want, even though that's negative.
Right.
I mean, how does a guy get to be a successful drug dealer or pimp? Because he's seemingly giving people what they want. But I mean, it's horrible influence and it's poor leadership, et cetera. And sometimes you get politicians and preachers who are not much better than that. So if you have the definitions right,
maybe
then
worse.
then you're out to help people make really positive changes. And Pastor Jason was talking about in a spiritual sense, that's being right yourself, having a strong sense of what's right.
Yeah.
And so that would be a sense of God and truth and absolute truth in the Bible and salvation and then honestly directing yourself towards God.
Yeah, your character before your conduct.
Character before your conduct.
Yeah.
Tony was talking in the business realm how that meant like we were talking about Reagan, you know who you are and where you're going and what you want to accomplish, and you're able to communicate that. And everybody's like, yeah. And it seems very basic. And then when you help people win, you become their de facto leader. So it doesn't matter if you're the lowest person on the rung, you can influence upwards. If you're in the middle of the pack, you can influence left and right. And if you're at the top of the pack, you definitely are obligated to use your influence to serve God.
Right.
And that's what we're saying. Government is commanded to serve God.
Right.
And autocratic leaders, usually serve themselves.
Right.
Or a group of oligarchs.
John Maxwell says, John Maxwell writes a lot about leadership. I like a lot of it. Some of it I'm not really fond of. But he says a leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way.
Yeah.
And that's really, I think, a good, concise way of saying it.
And so in simplicity, I want to, this time, having reiterated the principle, really go into the practical for us from all the different perspectives for folks. And I want to stick with Biden because, like I said, we hadn't talked much about Biden. We don't want to overly crucify him. He just seems like bumbling, like he's just been brought along. But at the same time, we don't want to give him a free pass. He's the president of the United States.
Leader of the free world,
Leader of the free world. And so Washington Post recently had an article by Ashley Parker. As a candidate, Biden promised results, not a revolution. Then COVID changed everything. Well, COVID was... in some respects, the responses helped put him in power.
Right.
And
he ran on COVID.
And so it's like they burned the house down. Now they're in power, and they're still trying to blame Trump and cops and billionaires. The reality is they burn it down in order to take power. I mean, some of it was illegitimate, right? Even some election process.
More people have died of COVID since Biden took over than when Trump was in office.
And so, they burnt down the house to bring about a change in power, autocratic power, rather than using leadership. And in the end now, they can't govern. They can't govern themselves. Things are going from bad to worse. And so I think we have a leadership crisis for sure, among other things. Ashley Parker says, as a Democratic primary candidate, Joe Biden told debate viewers he understood that most Americans are looking for results, not a revolution. He promised wealthy donors that in the Biden administration, nothing would fundamentally change. Of course, right now we know they're going to tax the rich. I mean, they're going to go and get them. Basically, the article comes down and says, in a nod to history, Biden has installed a huge portrait of Franklin D. Roosevelt as the focal point of the Oval Office. And it kind of goes in the article's like how I'm going to be, FDR. I'm going to have this long presidency. I'm going to bring people together. And that's easy to say now because all people think of as FDR is the guy in the wheelchair that fought World War II and practically won it.
Right.
The reality is he was a socialist. The reason we were allies with Joseph Stalin was because Uncle Joe, was a socialist. Really, Churchill was half socialist. And so, the three of them, had different perspectives, but he wasn't really that liked at the time. He's definitely very, very criticized. We were coming out of the Depression. He had all these socialistic, almost communist ideals about redistribution of wealth and trying to help people out. And ultimately, those were failing totally and completely. And then Pearl Harbor happened. And so we basically redirected everything and had war powers and everything else. And so what happened? Capitalism built the ships, built the planes, it was kind of a reverse of what happened. And so, he ended up being good because his plan didn't work. And part of his plan not working, emboldened the Japanese and the Germans to stand against us.
And isn't the American presidency this paradox of leadership and philosophy? Because even in our founding, you had Jefferson, who was very anti-federal, and yet made some of the largest federal moves of the beginning of our nation.
Yeah, I mean, the Louisiana Purchase.
Right.
I mean, that was...
And then conversely, Adams, who was very much federal, having to make some choices against federalism, and because of the pragmatism or the practicality of the
scary
office.
thing about, to me, that bad leadership, you're setting an image, you're trying to define leadership and what you're going to do, and yet some people would say that Germany and Japan would never have even attacked us if we had had different policies.
Right.
And so, are you setting the stage for Iran, North Korea, China, Russia to feel like Joe Biden's in, this is the direction of America, we can do this? I have no hopes that we go into something like war to return it, but still, I don't want to give him a pass on the idea of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Let me read a little bit. This is from the Bible Nation Society, BibleNation.org. There's an article on there by James R. Patrick, founder of the MacArthur Institute, excerpted from his Foundation of Liberty series. He says in the overview of the New Deal, Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, has great imagination. If he had been president at the time when the Treasury was overflowing, he would have gone down in history as the greatest builder since the world began. So stated Secretary Harold Ickes in 1934 of Franklin Roosevelt. And of course, we did end up having a flush of money and doing building, but it was because of the war. President Herbert Hoover did not agree. He stated, along with currency manipulation, that's going on today under the Biden administration, the New Deal introduced to America the spectacle of fascist dictation to business, labor, and agriculture. So that's what Joe's saying. I mean, he's not putting Joseph Stalin behind him on the wall, but he's putting a guy that had currency manipulation and the spectacle of fascist dictation to business, labor, and agriculture. Curtis B. Dahl, Franklin Roosevelt's son-in-law, this is bad, made these comments. Speaking politically, I regard Woodrow Wilson as a man who sold his soul to the internationalist program, to the one world debt finance forces, and thereby opened the first big holes in our constitutional and financial dikes. He regarded Franklin Roosevelt after 1932 as likewise selling his political soul to the same one world internationalist debt finance forces, and under their coercion, he made larger the Woodrow Wilson holes in the dike. The net result, devoid of political and ideological fanfare, if such could ever happen, is obvious. Both men failed in providing a sound leadership for America, but succeeded in furthering themselves and a pattern of policy which advanced various alien-backed programs, our foreign policy. This result was especially noticeable in respect to FDR and his health, as his health began to fail and his advisors took over. Adlai E. Stevenson said of Franklin Roosevelt, this is positive, the Democratic Party took over when the nation was almost in a state of receivership in 1933. Fortunately, we had a great and revered leader, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Under his leadership, the Democratic Party dedicated itself to improving opportunity and security for all citizens. Now, notice that the term, improving opportunity and security for all citizens, this is the same way as saying a spectacle of fascist dictation to business, labor, and agriculture. Right? It's all in the verbiage. Journalist H.L. Mencken provides us with a different slant. If President Roosevelt became convinced tomorrow that coming out for cannibalism would get him the votes he so sorely needs, he would begin fattening a missionary in the White House backyard come Wednesday. It is obvious that he, more than average president, tended to bring raves of approval or highly critical remarks. Roosevelt sent mixed signals. It was hard to discern where he really stood and what he really believed. To the casual listener, he seemed to be conservative in philosophy with a clear understanding of the Constitution. But if you listened closely to what he said, you would find his choice of words implied a belief that government needed to add just a little bit more to the kettle of freedom. Right. And this is basically a guy who had influence, right? But he wasn't clear on it. He was letting things be inferred upon him, and he was taking us down a bad path that led to World War II. Yeah. Now, at the time, then it's a good thing that we had the generals that we had, and FDR really did let the generals fight the war. He really did. He listened to them and set the policy and such.
Well, and that the war produces Eisenhower, who was a good leader.
Yes,
and was the only man that could bring a coalition of free nations together to fight Nazism.
Yes,
and so because that's that idea from that last conversation of the idea of leading, but not by coercion.
Right.
You're taking free nations that have their own sovereign will, but then giving them a vision of a plan that can work, that will lead to all of their success.
Yeah. Why wasn't Marshall put in charge of Europe? Right? Because he was the ranking general. He had been around the longest. And why did Eisenhower get the call? He was lieutenant colonel because he was able to have that Kansas boy smile, and he was able to put everyone at ease, in the room. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, and then you think in our, Ulysses S. Grant, same idea. In other words, these military generals who had success in that realm, then that translates politically. It's almost it's almost like, of course, he wasn't as great a president as
Right.
as Eisenhower, but they didn't come up the political ranks.
Right.
Therefore,
Peacetime generals are always political.
yeah,
And then basically war comes, they wash out. And that's, a lot of times in war, if you look at historically, especially the American wars, captains, majors, colonels end up winning the war at that point in time because, what had previously happened wasn't that great. So I wanted to then, not just criticize Joe Biden, but just teach what is practical leadership. What could Joe do?
Right.
Joe, if you were going to listen to us for 2 minutes, how could you improve your leadership, basically?
believe on the Lord Jesus Christ.
That's about it I can see right now.
That's
yeah.
number one.
Come on, man.
Come on.
So I thought rather than define leadership principally, we would define leadership practically for everybody who's listening. So leadership practically requires a definitive policy, direction, and vision, not an allowance of something to be inferred so you can be popular, so you could be quote unquote influential for the purpose of being in power. Pastors do this. They try to gain influence for the purpose of staying in power. And that's not bringing your church anywhere. That's when churches die. That's when churches' influence are no longer salty because it becomes self-interested. So, definitive policy, direction, and vision. That's what we said Reagan did a good job. Here's the policy. Tear down the wall.
Right.
That's the policy, right? And direction and a vision. You had a vision for the wall coming down.
Right.
And it came down.
Right.
Leadership must clearly communicate its goals and persuade both naysayers and the apathetic. Okay, so Joe, persuade me. Say something. You've not said anything. I think Trump did a bad job in the debates because they got him caught up on himself. And he's defending some sort of record that nobody knows what he's talking about. And rather than say something definitive, what's your policy? Communicate the goals and persuade the naysayers.
And that's what self-interest will do. Is you get caught up defending yourself or making it about you or your ego instead of really attacking what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
And his character would not allow him to do what he needed to do in those moments.
Right.
So there was a clear definition of what needed to happen in those debates, but because he didn't have the character to support the right actions.
Some of us are sitting there going, why aren't you saying that?
Right.
Because he wasn't thinking that.
No.
It's like he couldn't grasp it.
It's not who he is. And then his opposition knew how to bait him, knew how to play on his character, which, in the spiritual realm, we have an adversary who knows how to play against our character.
Right.
And so to get you to make the wrong leadership decision. And so that's why it's who you are before what you do.
Yeah, and that's why we're always talking about how self-interest, it's not that, I got to pay my bills, and if a finger's going to poke me in the eye, my eyelid's going to shut. I mean, that's a kind of a natural self-interest.
Right.
But the devil will use that. I'm unsatisfied, and here comes a job. It's a better job. It's more money, but I got to go over here, and there's no church that I could go to over there. And so you're making something that's based upon self-interest. And so you kind of go and move that. You think you're successful, but you've stepped on a mine because you've taken your family out of church.
Right.
And you could accentuate that 100 different ways. The Bible tells the pastor that you're to persuade the naysayer, convince the naysayer. Don't hate them, love them, find out what their
Compel
perspective
them.
is, and say, well, and that's why we shouldn't be afraid of strong minds. That are opposed to us or whatever, because really they're opposed to themselves.
Right.
Leadership is helping them win,
Yep.
and so part of that is having to engage that. And sometimes we try to run from that, And so, but we shouldn't run from someone who's got a wrong philosophical religious idea and say, well, we'll go over here. Someone doesn't have any philosophy or idea. Those people already kind of want to have God. They want to succeed spiritually, and we can help them. So. That's the manner and the character that's in you so that you can go forward. So leadership requires definitive policy, direction, and vision. It must clearly communicate its goals and persuade. It should inspire and personalize the prospects of accomplishment, victory, or results. Okay? How do we do that spiritually? Sometimes we'll preach a sermon that says, here's how to defeat your anger. Right, we're personalizing this. I mean, that anger made you lose your job. That anger made your children not trust you. That whatever. And so we kind of then clearly communicate and persuade, and we're trying to inspire them, not necessarily beat them down. Right, personalize the prospects in business. Tony, you're doing the same thing. Is you're almost coaching. and inspiring people sometimes and say, hey, you can do it. I mean, yeah, you're going to pay me, but how about this? Don't pay me for this. Let me just inspire you for a second, because I'm it behooves me to help you win.
Right.
And give them something for free.
Yeah.
That can help them win. Jason, what do you think about generally your church and your church staff? How do you inspire and personalize them in the prospects of accomplishment, victory, or results? You've got young staff, young ministers. You're trying to train them. I would think, I'm going to help this guy win a soul. I'm going to help this guy really have a disciple, and that way he's got a victory. He knows he's something like that.
Yeah, because the staff have already committed themselves. They see the grand vision. They see the big picture. They have a idea of what they would hope to become.
Right.
And I think one of the keys to a church staff person, particularly, and even the pastor, is they have an idea of what they want to become, and they realize that what they're doing is helping them become that.
Right.
And then you're helping facilitate that in their life. And so helping them become self-aware of their capacities, of where they're, of what they might not know about themselves, to discover that in a compassionate way, because sometimes you can cause someone to discover that in a traumatic way that stunts them or ruins them, and then help them overcome that.
Right.
Help them overcome that and grow into what you believe God has for them.
I think really practically, too. I mean, this is really practical, is that the dad, the boss, the pastor, whatever, the politician, is you have to give a lot of attaboys. You have to be a positive person. And our presidents should be saying, great job, America. Yeah, they don't say that.
Yeah.
They want to take the credit for themselves. They say, Americans have done this. We were at 20%, now we're 30%. Great job, America. Stay with it. Kudos. And pastors need to do that, and bosses need to do that, and just let other people have the victory.
Yeah.
You guys have victory, and some of that victory is my victory, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that people that you have influenced have victory.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, but why is that? Because I think every leader at their core would want to be an encourager.
Yeah.
They would like to believe they're an encourager. Even for the self-interested aspect of, I want people to like me, and they probably like encouragers better. We'll even try to spin our lack of encouragement as tough love, and so no, that's still love, even though it's tough. And there's that.
Sure, sometimes.
But why is it that we don't encourage as much as we ought to?
Right.
And I think it comes from this fear that if I encourage too much, they're going to become complacent.
Right.
And so we drive. And so we're driving with, you haven't met the mark yet. You haven't achieved yet. You're not there yet. And so what we're doing is we're holding our tacit approval out in front of them as this carrot that they can never get to.
Right.
And so they're chasing after this thing.
Yeah.
And so because fear and that kind of pressure is a good motivator.
Yeah.
In other words, tyrants have risen on that. I mean, despots have risen on that.
Fear.
But then, and I don't know what the word is for that, because I was thinking of a word for that, because, I'm an alliterator.
Yeah.
I was thinking of a word that starts with the letter I,
Right.
because on the inverse of that, the converse of that is inspiration.
Yeah.
And then you inspire
Intimidator?
someone. Intimidation. There, thank you.
You're welcome.
See,
Awesome.
I got
the
you.
point of
Intimidation.
this
Good.
Growing your brand from A to Z.
There it is. There it is. AZ Business Solutions. When you can't alliterate, call Tony Nash. You go from
Commiserate.
That's right.
So you go from we're gonna have to write this book.
Okay.
You go from intimidation to inspiration.
Yeah.
Man,
I would say too that in a practical sense,
I do.
if you're a leader and you're helping people win, that's a lot of instruction, and so you're giving. Don't ever get tired of giving instruction to everybody all the time, and just 80% instruction, and if they come back and they've completed 80% of that, then you say, good job, good job, good job.
Right.
And then you have to have correctiveness, which is sometimes negative, but that should be 10 to 20% corrective measures. Everybody needs that. Whom the Lord loves, He chastens.
Right.
But I mean, the Lord blesses me far more than He chastens me,
Well,
and I don't understand that, but I think that's a good balance. And so a president sometimes might have to say, those Democrats or those Republicans or that person, that's necessary, but he should probably instruct them first. Senator so-and-so, come on over to the office. I want to instruct. If my thing is to help you win and to inspire and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to give instruction, attaboy. You're willing to attaboy even someone who's on the other side of the spectrum.
Sure.
Would be a better, form of leadership. And I'm not saying that they don't always do that, but go ahead.
Well, and then how you do that is with a vision that is inspiring,
Right.
that causes someone to realize we all want this win because they see the vision.
Mm-hmm.
So for an American president is they give a vision of an America that we would all want to be a part of.
Right.
And we have philosophical differences, but how can we get to that America? And then it causes everybody, instead of by intimidation, to produce the bare minimum to get approval, by inspiration, bring their best to the table.
Right.
So this is such a lofty goal that I'm willing to give myself to. Then how do I bring my best to the table to get there?
And I think Trump half did this in the idea, especially winning minorities, by helping minorities start businesses and be business owners. Because rather than share the wealth or have all these socialistic things, no, let's get you to work. You're making your own money. You're your own guy. You buying your own car. You got your nice suit and all that kind of stuff. And I think he was trying to appeal, to that, rather than I'm going to give, those 4 crazy Democrat gals, let's give them their victory that destroys people.
Right.
It's not inspiring.
And what's his interest in that? A business owner is more likely to be a Republican voter than a welfare recipient.
Sure.
So if I can turn you into a business owner,
it's self-interest to some extent, rather than.
But that's a good vision for America.
Yeah, and I think so. You ought to be able to put those things together. Let me just finish this. Leadership must be humble, deflecting praise. Trump didn't deflect any praise.
No.
He
still
didn't.
doesn't.
No, deflecting praise, and gracious, directing the same praise to others. And Biden, why don't you do that? So I'm saying we've got poor leadership today, and the principles are wrong, and so the practices become wrong. Leadership must be honest, telling even the hardest truths, and apologetic, owning its errors, and hopeful, always believing in victory. That is what I want in leader. That's what I want my pastors to be. That's what I want my dad to be. That's what I want my politicians to be.
Who doesn't want to win?
Right.
I mean, and I think that's even in a visceral sense, that's a critical element in a church. I mean, we sing victory in Jesus. And so a person walks in and viscerally feels we're winning.
Yeah.
On this team, we win. We're winning. And that is such a critical ingredient in any leadership paradigm.
Yeah.
And again, it goes back to understanding what victory looks like. What is victory?
Yeah.
What does that look like? And then when you understand that, when you understand what victory looks like, then you can get people excited about it, and then you can make the decisions every day that help get you one inch closer to that victory mark.
My son Jesse is working with school kids, and he's administrating teachers and parents. And he's pretty quiet. He holds his cards close. How you doing? Good. Everything's fine. But the things that he's really opened up and shared has been exciting, because I've helped that person get a victory that they wouldn't otherwise have in their life.
Right.
And I'm like, he's getting it.
Yeah.
He's just getting it, because that is it. And
That's
so
it.
he's tasted that real taste of leadership, because that person, and now those people now, he's their de facto leader, because he helped them to do that. So leadership is confident, not confusing. And so poor Biden is getting a little bit up in years, and he's having issues, and he's confusing. He's confusing his own. He's confusing the left, and he's confusing the right, and it's just hard to get back on that. Leadership can be liberal without being immoral. The Bible does say that we're to be liberal in love, doesn't it? Leadership can be conservative without being controlling. And so we just kind of throw the term fascist around all the time. Leadership should be sure and clear and balanced. That's what you were just saying. That leadership tends to make the rightist people centrist and the leftist people centrist, because that's kind of the nature of America and what the office will do to you. And most of our presidents, when they get out of office, they stay pretty quiet. They just support whoever's in, left or right, and try to be that supportive thing. And boy, wouldn't that be good if that's how it was? But that's not how it is right now. Good leaders are written about for future generations to learn from, but great leaders are transcendent, spoken about for the rest of time. And that kind of leads us to the end, and that is George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Ronald Reagan, Robert E. Lee, Eisenhower. Good leaders, great leaders that have been written about, and that we're still speaking about, even though they're in the grave. And so there are levels of leadership. The most basic level of leadership is position. Right. Somebody gave you a position, you're in a position of influence, but you never move up. And the highest level of leadership is when, even though you're dead, your spirit's still in the room, and they're still making leadership quotes about you. I wish I could say that I wish every president was a Republican and a Baptist. But we've had one Republican Baptist president, Warren G. Harding, Teapot Dome, children out of wedlock. So we had that once, and honestly, people rate him at the bottom of the barrel.
And Jimmy Carter and
no, those weren't Republicans.
Oh, no.
Those were Democrats, and that's Truman, Carter, Clinton, and Al Gore. Those are the Baptists who were on the left side.
Doing a good job.
And so we're not really doing a great job. So the message is, don't vote a Baptist into
office.
Into that. Yeah. So I don't know if Mike Pence is going to run.
Huckabee.
Mike Pence was criticized because he wouldn't go out to eat with a woman, without his wife, that he doesn't drink in public, at these public events, and everybody's expected to drink. Everybody makes excuses about that, but he just says, no, I don't, do that. So he has been, for those of us on the right, more of a pronounced Christian who's true to understanding what he's done. Now, in some cases, he placated Trump to the nth, but he didn't on January 6th.
Right.
Well, so whatever the truth of that was, he wasn't involved in that stuff.
And the problem is he attached himself so closely to Trump because Trump was winning, with the Republican Party at least. And then when he decided he wasn't going to be a part of Trump, now all of these people have turned their back on him because he's anti-Trump. And so that's tough, man. That's tough. You have to be principled throughout. You can't follow a personality. You can't follow.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off.
You're good.
No, but the idea of how do you make those kind of tough decisions like that? How does Mike Pence not, just fall off the cliff after all that?
Falter, but don't quit and don't fall completely.
But more than any other modern politician, and the wife illustration illustrates this, is he is confident in his identity. So if you know who and what you are, and you know what defines you, and this is why what is so liberating about a relationship with Jesus Christ is he gives you your identity. If my identity is not even in the list of my accomplishments, if my identity is not in my actions to other people, if my identity is found solely in the person of Jesus Christ, then I can make the right decision and have freedom.
Right.
And people's opinions do not change how I feel about myself, because how I feel about myself is how Jesus tells me to feel about myself. What I know and believe about myself is what Jesus has told me to feel. And this is what gives you the ultimate ability to have selfless or not self-interested leadership, because you only have one person that you're trying to serve, to please.
The song says he leads his dear children along. And I'm so glad, the Lord's changed me. He's changed my mind, what I think. He's changed my heart, what I love and hate. He's changed my will, what I want and what I do. And he's changed my perspective. That happens through life a little bit. You get kind of grow more conservative, I think. But he's changed me. He's led me along. Sometimes through contrition, but more often than not, he's a benevolent hand. He's not a cosmic killjoy by any stretch. He's got a judgment. And so sometimes that comes out, but most of us never step on that line. We don't even go close to that cliff, but he's good in that way. And so Jesus Christ is the ultimate principled and practical leader. The Bible teaches us how to do that. We've had good and bad in our country. There's been good and bad in Trump and good and bad in Biden. And folks need to just stand more on leadership. We all of a sudden we've quit talking about leadership. We're talking about this issue, this deed, that deed, this constituency, that constituency. We need to be talking about character and leadership in its principle and its practice, so that the next generation, we can produce decades of that again. Of course, I believe that can happen. I mean, I'm not dissatisfied that that's never going to happen again. We've got to believe it. That's why we're having these podcasts, so that the Bible can influence culture. The best culture is the Bible culture. It's proven, and it works.